Women on Wealth is proudly sponsored by First for Women, celebrating leading women.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Women on Wealth. We're coming to you from Davos, Switzerland at the World Economic Forum. Now, designed to measure gender inequality, the Global Gender Gap Report was first published in 2009 by the World Economic Forum. Since inception, 111 countries have been included, and one of the key findings is that the world has seen only a small improvement in equality for women in the workplace. According to 2014's report, the gender gap for economic participation and opportunity now stands at 60% worldwide, having closed by 4% from 56% in 2006. Now, I've been talking to some of the leading women here at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Let's take a look at a conversation with the Executive Director of Oxfam, Winfried Binyama.
Well, I am here to bring the voices of the millions of people we work with in the poorest countries in the world, to bring their concerns before the business and political leaders here in Davos. And I'm privileged to be invited to be a co-chair of the World Economic Forum here in Davos, and I'm using every opportunity to bring the concerns of poor people around the world to them.
Does being a co-chair enable you to open up the space a little bit more, to focus the conversations on the poorest in the world, on the low income brackets, and in particular on the have-nots in the inequality equation?
Yes, I have been here just for one day, but before that Oxfam launched our report on inequality. We called it Wealth, Having It All and Wanting More. And in that report, we put out a statistic that 80 people, richest people in the world, own as much as a half of the rest of the world, the bottom half, 3.5 billion people. 80 people who can fit on a double-decker bus own as much as 3.5 billion people at the bottom. And we also put out another worrying statistic that this trend is increasing and increasing rapidly. And if it isn't checked, next year we will have 1% richest people owning more than the 99% of us combined. This is dangerous for the world. And people here, business and political leaders, understand that this is dangerous for the world, so we're here to talk solutions.
Right. So it could get worse. Let's talk about the triggers that could lead us into that negative picture, and whether you get a sense that the haves have become increasingly more accepting of the often very bold policies that would have to be implemented if you're to turn that double-decker bus around.
No, we know what needs to be done. We know why it has happened. We know why inequality is rising, and we know what needs to be done. Inequality isn't happening just by accident. It's a result of policy choices. It isn't inevitable. With the right policies from governments and from business, we can turn it around and make a fairer and more prosperous world. The evidence is there that actually extreme inequality slows growth. So even for business people, they know that extreme inequality is bad for business. It's bad for growth, it's bad for business, it's bad for stable societies, it causes social tensions, it's linked to crisis and social breakdown. So it's important that business and political leaders now move to actions. And the actions Oxfam is calling for include fixing the global tax system. The global tax system is leaking seriously. you have a situation where the richest companies and the richest individuals get away without paying their fair share of taxes. So we must close those tax loopholes. Oxfam is calling for a World Tax Summit because this year we are going to decide, the world is going to decide on sustainable development goals, which must be funded from domestic resources. So it's an opportunity in Addis Ababa in July at the Financing for Development Summit to take a new approach to fixing the global tax system that is allowing companies to run away with huge profits without paying their fair share of taxes.
Naysayers would come back and say that it's corruption that enables many multinational corporations to get away without paying those taxes. Are we tackling the corruption end of the equation?
Yes and no. Actually, a lot of tax evasion is partly corruption, but a lot of it is also actually legal and accepted. And that's why we need tax reforms at a global level. Let me give you an example. A company in, say, Zambia or South Africa or Guinea, a global company, can be in extraction. It can set up another company that is its own company that is lending to the company that is extracting. And when it comes to declaring profits, it will say that it must first pay the loan of the company that loaned before it can pay taxes. That way of setting up many companies and failing to tax where the business is done, where the profit, the economic activity is done, all those are actually legal. So what we also have companies that have, and individuals who stash their money into tax havens.
Yeah.
That's legal. It's not illegal. But that is untaxed money. $18 trillion sitting in tax havens all over the world. Money of wealthy people that's untaxed, that could be used to make lives better for everybody, to create jobs and to bring health and education to young people. So a lot of this is legal. Some of it is corruption. Some of it is legal. What we want is to fix the tax system so that companies pay their fair share.
I also caught up with Ushi Schreiber from EY, and she gave us some insight as to what women need to do to break through on the entrepreneurial front, as well as assume leadership positions in the public service. We're catching up with Ushi Schreiber from EY here in Davos, Switzerland. Ushi, thank you for making the time to join us.
Thank you for having me.
Why so few women? Why are there so few Ushis and Noziphos here?
So that's a long-standing issue, obviously, at Davos, but then Davos is reflective of what we see in our societies, in business, in parliaments around the world. Women are, of course, still not represented at equal levels or equal numbers, and clearly that's reflected here. So the people who come here are leaders in government and business, and clearly there aren't enough women. In fact, yesterday EY launched a campaign here which picks up on the theme of the World Economic Forum's report on gender parity, and that report tells us that it will take 80 years to get equal representation of women, certainly in economic participation. We think that's too long. Let's accelerate that.
How do we accelerate? How do we make this 80 years a far smaller number?
Well, first of all, we really have to talk about it clearly and give it voice. Secondly, we need initiatives that get more women into parliaments. And so, there are a whole range of things in place, of course, that look at lists of women who go, and get access to some of the better seats and so on. It is also, of course, about mentoring and championing women through organizations as we do, as others are doing, to make sure there's a pipeline of women for senior roles. And then flexibility is important.
Right.
Men and women want flexible work arrangements, and that's something that needs to be put in place everywhere.
Let's start off with the business landscape. To a large extent, it seems as if women are still stuck in the small to medium enterprise space. How do we break into big business?
It's interesting in the entrepreneurial space that you are referring to, because we know that at the moment more businesses are started by women, and many of those businesses are successful. But where women are often hesitant is to actually scale their business and get funding for their business and so on, because they actually go into private enterprise or into their own businesses because they want control. So what we know is important, and we actually do it, is to have mentoring programs for women entrepreneurs, to encourage women entrepreneurs to think at a bigger scale, to think bigger for their businesses. And what we are seeing is that that actually works.
Right. Of course, you also made mention of the public space. We have seen a few women, especially in the African context, working their way up to a head of state, but far outnumbered by their male counterparts. What would you describe as the biggest resistant barriers that still keep women away from being the number one citizen?
So EY today, jointly with Women in Parliament, released a report that actually looks at especially this issue. And what our survey, together with the Women in Parliament Forum, as well as the World Bank Women's Group, basically identifies, is that there are a number of barriers for women in particular. One is that people just think of women as needing to be home with the children. And clearly that, you know, as long as people think about child rearing still as a woman's issue, not as a parent's issue, we will have that issue. Women in politics also get far less support, either from their political system or their parties, or indeed financial investments. So those things of support and, I suppose, challenging the stereotype around it is really important. Now, South Africa, of course, is an example of, in fact, setting targets and setting quotas. Rwanda, you know, has a very large number of female ministers. The European Union has put in place, through the European Commission, a whole range of rules and sets of targets. So, you know, there is progress in all of this, but clearly, mostly, I suppose, the representation of women reflects community attitudes. People actually also have to vote for women. And so giving voice to that issue, we think, is very important now more than ever.
Now, you know, every week we bring you a woman who is flexing her power muscles on the global stage. Let's take a look at the WEF Africa head, Elsie Kanza. Perhaps one of the continent's most influential women making waves globally, Elsie Kanza is the World Economic Forum's head of Africa. She was born in Kenya to Tanzanian parents. Between 2006 and 2011, she served as the personal assistant and economic advisor to Tanzanian President Jakaya Kikwete. Her illustrious career began with the country's Ministry of Finance and Central Bank, where she worked in various capacities between 1997 and 2006. Elsie Kanza, redefining power in the global business arena. And that's it for this week's episode of Women on Wealth, coming to you from a very, very cold Davos in Switzerland. Remember to keep the conversation alive. That's by talking to me on Twitter at Nozipho Mbanjwa. And of course, the hashtag is Wow410. We want to know who is redefining the concept of power in your world. Until next time, stay empowered.